So you might have noticed that the actress Gillian Anderson triumphed recently in the Golden Globe Awards. That was for series 3 of The Crown, where she played the part of Margaret Thatcher. And actually, that was her second trophy in the Golden Globe. She was nominated 4 times back in the 1990s for her part in the X-Files series. She won the top spot there in 1997. I must admit, though, that when I saw her as Margaret Thatcher, not just saw her, but heard her, I was amazed about how almost chillingly she brought the Iron Lady back to life. Thatcher really polarized politics back in the 70s and 80s. You loved her or you hated her. And you certainly never got an opportunity to interrupt her. She had, so I've heard, perfected a trick to that effect. She didn't pause to take a break in between her sentences. When people who want to get a word in subconsciously pick up on that cue and launch in with their comment. Instead, Margaret Thatcher supposedly took breaths at random times in the middle of her sentences. And people weren't ready for them, so they missed their chance to contradict that formidable woman. Some would say they escaped lightly, because at least then she didn't shoot them down in flames of derision. There are quite a few rather more common little tricks you can employ to win an argument, though. You can deliberately misquote people, or at least quote them out of context. You can insist that it's a simple question, yes or no, when the situation is actually not that simple or clear-cut at all. And you can make claims that you don't have to substantiate with specific evidence. Oh, everybody knows that something. Everyone but the person you're disagreeing with, at least. And it works with religion as well as with politics, of course. You don't need to talk to many people for very long to find out that they believe all sorts of nonsense about the Bible, and they will happily state these ideas very emphatically without, most likely, having bothered to read it for themselves. So the Bible's full of contradictions. Everybody knows that. In which case, could you perhaps show me a few? Oh, the Bible has changed beyond recognition over the years. Everyone knows that. So could you perhaps show me some of the places where it's changed? And how about that phrase, the God of the Old Testament? Have you heard that one? Oh, you should have. Everyone knows that. Actually, no, that's a sneaky trick, even to say that phrase. Because if we're not careful, we answer as if we accept that there is a God of the Old Testament who is, by implication, different from the God of the New Testament. The distinction that people are typically trying to make there is that the God of the Old Testament, so-called, put it in quote marks, is mean and vindictive, whereas Jesus, now he's okay. He's actually quite nice. But don't listen too much to that first 2/3 of the Bible, or you'll be misled by all those nasty things that the defective quote marks God of the Old Testament is said to do. I don't know precisely how you might try to answer that if someone tries it on you. I suggest you find a few passages in the Old Testament where the God of the Old Testament is quite obviously recognizably the same as the God of the New Testament, full of grace. Maybe in Exodus chapter 34, for example. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Perhaps in the Psalms where you see he's gentle and caring. Psalm 103, for example. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. For he knows our frame, he remembers that we are dust. And if you hear people trying to say that the God of the Old Testament, put it in quote marks, is mean and exclusive, whereas Jesus is nice and welcoming, you could even go to today's passage in Exodus 18. If you think of the Exodus from Egypt as some kind of national birth, then Israel is still pretty much a baby at this time. Their national identity is not yet fully formed. They've had a nasty scrape in the previous chapter with the Amalekites, that's for sure, and there's plenty more of that ahead. But Israel's calling was never to be totally exclusive, jealously hoarding all of God's goodness for themselves. See what God, the gracious God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, intended right back at the start when he called Abraham. Genesis 12. and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. See that? All the families of the earth. And therefore, I think what we might have as we go through this section of the book of Exodus is showing how this promise of Genesis 12 is starting to work out. And so Amalek swoops in without warning against Israel and is not just defeated, but abolished. Exodus 17:14, as we saw last week. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in the book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. There's dishonor answered with curse, as promised. But now into the Israelite camp comes a pagan priest who is converted, we probably call it nowadays. He rejoices in Israel's deliverance, he blesses God, and then he himself finds blessing. Of course, he's not just any old pagan priest. He happens to be Moses' wise father-in-law, who hears how God delivered his people and becomes Israel's first convert. Going to split this chapter fairly obviously, pretty much down the middle. The first half, we see how Jethro learns to worship, and then we find out how Moses learns to lead. Let's start off with verses 1 to 12. And in fact, let's start off with verse 1. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. I think I need to mention that there's some uncertainty about precisely when this chapter occurs in the chronology of Exodus. Plainly, it's here in chapter 18, and chapter 18, of course, comes before chapter 20, the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. But there are suggestions that chapter 18 stuff actually happened after chapter 20 stuff. I'm not entirely sure, but I think I can see the point of the argument. You come to the second half of the chapter, when there's stuff about Moses judging all the people. And you see a quite settled arrangement, the people queuing up for Moses to give judgment in their minor disputes and uncertainties. And I would certainly wonder whether this could have come about pretty much immediately, only a couple of months out of Egypt, and a good chunk of that time spent on the road. Well, actually, it's probably off-road, traveling as well. And yet Moses is not yet totally worn down by the process either. Jethro points out that it's unsustainable in the long term, so it hasn't been going on very long yet by the looks of it. I know it still seems odd to us when we're used to our historical accounts being given in strict chronological order, but there are some places in the Bible where things plainly are reported out of this order. So I think we have to assume that this is not an overwhelming priority to the Bible writers or their original readers. So I think it certainly could be that this event happens post-Sinai. And maybe all those uncertainties about the laws are because those laws have only recently been delivered to the Israelites, and they're still getting to grips with how to apply them. But in any case, news of Israel's exit from Egypt and repelling the assault of the Amalekites, that would be hot news doing the rounds of the area. So the priest of Midian, which is somewhere around this general area too, would surely have heard of what was going on. And this particular man, I'm sure you must have noticed as we went through the passage, he has a personal stake in all of this. For this is not just any old priest of Midian, he is also Moses' father-in-law. The passage is at great pains to emphasize this. I didn't count them myself, but I saw it in a book that the word, that little phrase, occurs 13 times in this passage. And Moses' father-in-law has been taking care of some very special possessions of Moses too. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home along with her 2 sons. We've not been told about this until now, and we're not given the reason for it either. Perhaps Moses thought it was just too dangerous for his wife and family to be around during some of these conflicts. But now it appears that things are settling down again. And let's face it, The Israelite camp is where all the action in the area is centered. So what a convenient reason for Jethro to pay a visit and see for himself. I thought the comment about the names of the boys was interesting, though. The name of the one was Gershom. That's two Hebrew words stuck together, the word for stranger and there. For he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. The name of the other was Eliezer. That's two Hebrew words stuck together, my God and help. For he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Now, we've heard about Gershom before, but quite a long way back, chapter 2, verse 22. That was recorded just after Moses had left Egypt 40 years back. So I can't see Gershom being just a little kid. He could already been a grown man, I would have thought. But then there's the name of this second son, whom we haven't heard of before and don't hear of again afterwards. Look at the meaning of that name we're given here. And that is a puzzle to me. The God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Was Eliezer born a decade or more back and given a name that was more about future hope than actual reality as yet? Kind of a prophecy built into his name. There are examples of that elsewhere in the Bible. Whereas Eliezer only a baby, maybe only conceived before Moses sent Zipporah to safely, before the final showdown in Egypt, and now named to celebrate the nation's liberation. Or maybe they changed his name recently to celebrate God's hand in granting them this freedom. I don't know that we've got enough to decide, to be honest. I just find it curious, that's all. But we've got something much more certain to work and think through here. We're told where the reunion happened, the Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai area, either soon before or soon after all that Exodus 20 stuff. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. And probably according to the custom of the day, Moses is forewarned of the visit so that all the proper decorum for the meeting of two tribal leaders can be put in place. When he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her two sons with her, Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. I wonder if that was like our British, how are you? Or was it a bit more thoughtful and actually interested? It's really odd, but in the last few years, I've noticed several times people have said to me when we've met, yes, fine, thanks. And I know I haven't even asked them yet, how are you, like I'm supposed to. It's a bit of a shame, I think, that those words can be also empty and perfunctory. I really do quite hope that Moses and Jethro got down to the meaning of the word here. Welfare is clearly what's meant, and it's translated in that way in most of the Bible versions. But the word that is used in Hebrew is the word that we see in other contexts translated as peace. It's that word shalom. Wouldn't it be good if just once in a while when we meet, we ask each other with serious interest and concern, how's your peace today? Clearly, much of Moses' peace has been tied up in what has happened in the preceding chapters of Exodus. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Isn't it good, though, how Moses seems to be cutting his own leading role out of the picture here? Because this isn't about how God has been using him. It's just summarized as God being good to his people, God being faithful to his promise. The mighty to save had saved his people mightily. Moses hadn't opened up the Red Sea, God had. Joshua hadn't defeated Amalek, God had. And Jethro warms to all of this. Actually, more than warms, he rejoices. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. But you do know, don't you, that being a believer is more than just rejoicing at hearing a good story. Remember on that famous desert island where I guess they allow CDs as well as discs nowadays, there are, well, you take your...
You've gone silent, Peter.
I've gone silent, have I? Can anybody else hear me?
Went silent for a while.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm back. Desert island discs, remember? You're allowed to take a book with you. But already on that famous desert island, there are two great works of literature to read, the Bible and Shakespeare. You see, you can appreciate the Bible just as literature without ever coming to know its author. You can marvel at the wisdom Jesus showed in the words he spoke. You can weep tears of desolation when you read of the man of sorrows, and then tears of joy when you read on to the resurrection, and still you don't necessarily know Christ himself. So we see Jethro not just excited by Israel's recent history, but I think now personally committing himself to the God of that history. He doesn't just say, as people might do nowadays, oh, I think it's just great that you have this faith and you have this experience. Instead, he accepts it as actual truth and acknowledges the worthiness of this God who saves his people. Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians." But it's not just about things that have happened to people, other people. Something I think has happened to this priest of Midian as well. Exactly what that priestly role might have included, I'm not sure we can really say, but it would have included something to do with other so-called gods. Maybe he would have been like people nowadays, reckoning that equality and diversity works in the spiritual realm too. That all of those supposed deities were just as true and real, or equally imaginary and unreal, as all the others. Very likely he would have thought that whatever deity he worshipped was limited geographically. Some power, maybe even substantial power, in his or her own area, but other territories belong to other deities. But now all of that is changed. I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair that's probably the Egyptians, that they dealt arrogantly with the people. He's maybe not yet all the way through to what we would call monotheism, the belief that there is only one God, the kind of thing that you do see later in the Bible, Psalm 96, for example. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods, for all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. But Jethro has still made an enormous leap forward. A Gentile, to use a word that hadn't been coined then, has come to faith in the one true God, the powerful God who graciously saves his people. And it does not just affect his inward beliefs or even the words that he says, it affects his actions too. Verse 12, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. There's still some debate over whether he would have tried to offer those sacrifices himself, or whether maybe Aaron would have done the offering of whatever Jethro brought. I suspect the latter, but I can't actually prove it. But do you see what has happened? This man has gone from thinking that and being a symbol of a system that each tribe or area or grouping will have their own god or gods. And as we might say nowadays, it's all good. He's gone from being an active participant in that kind of system to a more personal faith in the one true God. He has borne witness to that change of outlook by some profoundly significant actions. It's actually very, very similar to how some of the New Testament Christians were described. The Thessalonians, in the first chapter of Paul's first letter to them, you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. Folks, way, way back, we have an example of just that kind of thing in Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, the former priest of Midian. Is that what you've done too? Have you turned from all those various false notions about reality that are doing the rounds nowadays? Are you intending now to serve and to worship instead the living and true God? And will you refuse to hide behind simply the word God, but gladly name the name Jesus, the Son of God, the one and only Son of the one and only God? Do you believe that God really, really did raise him from the dead? Do you not just accept, but have you even started to long for the literal, actual, physical return of this Jesus from heaven to finally wrap up this world system and to usher in something wonderful and new and right, just like it was back at the beginning, but not just very good, instead something even better? And have you put your faith in this Jesus now to save you from the very real, not at all imaginary, old school God of the Old Testament kind of notion, the very real and terrible wrath on those who will continue to unbelieve or even disbelieve? Those things increasingly characterize you, then you are welcome to break bread in fellowship with the people of God this morning. Breaking of bread is meant for the fellowship of the people of God. Just as we see Jethro welcomed into this fellowship at the end of this first section this morning. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. And yet, although Jethro had a lot to unlearn, he also had a lot of experience of this world, some common sense savvy, something worth listening to. I think it's amazing that Moses was so ready to learn from a recent convert from paganism, even if it was his own father-in-law, or maybe especially if it was his own father-in-law. And so in the second section here, Moses learns to lead. Jethro takes a spin around the camp with his eyes open and his mind engaged. He thinks about what he sees. That's a good example. The next day, Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening, sitting, as Moses was there. That was the position of authority. That's why a king has a throne and not a lectern. It looks as if there were plenty of people having to stand, the way it's reported here. Just as we have phone queuing nowadays that can go on for hours, trying to get through to someone who can help you with the advice you need can be a long job. And notice that word judge, by the way, and don't think it's always sort of legal stuff. It may well have included things about God's law, yes, particularly if, as we said earlier, this happens post-Sinai. But judging in the sense of the word here would very likely include all sorts of advice about all sorts of decisions. It's just general leadership in many ways. But whereas this can work when there is a small number of people, what has grown up here is just unworkable, and unworkable for both sides. Moses is doing this from morning till evening, and that will just slowly grind him down. And unless there's an amazingly efficient queuing system, which I don't think has been invented even yet, people are going to get mightily fed up about just standing around for most of the day to maybe eventually, hopefully, get to see Moses. I'm guessing this has just grown and developed into what we've seen here. And the people who have been there while it has been growing and the queues have been getting longer just haven't really noticed what's happening. But an outsider can see at once the craziness that has developed. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses is probably so mentally exhausted by the time he can talk to Jethro in this way that he has no time, as we say, to think outside the box, no energy to think outside the box, because there's all this need. What's the alternative? Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me and I decide between one person and another. And I make them know the statutes of God and his laws." It sounds good in principle, but don't we agree with Jethro? Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out for the thing that is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. But here's a suggestion. I think this sounds remarkably well balanced coming from such a new believer. Here is just the right balance of practicality and spirituality. Listen to advice and listen to God. Now, obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. Yes, Moses, you do have a critical role in all of this. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God, and you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moses, you're going to teach these people, and you're going to pray for them. There are things that these people need to do if they're going to follow God. And they also need to know the what and the how. But Moses, you are also going to delegate. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe. And place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Just as in God's church, centuries later, reliable, honest, trustworthy people are needed. Paul speaking to Timothy, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And if anything, the integrity of those people is more important than their ability. Again, Paul writing to Timothy, an overseer must be above reproach. And what does that mean in that society? It means the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, same kind of things as it will mean in today's society. But only delegate, Moses. Don't abdicate. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. And the result, if you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. And you know, I think the simplicity of what comes next is remarkable. Even faced with a win-win situation, we know, don't we, it's possible to not embrace it wholeheartedly because somebody else came up with the idea. Whereas this man, Moses, we're told later, has a very remarkable characteristic. He is meek. It's not about him. And what Jethro has said is a win-win-win. God will direct you. You will be able to endure. And the third win, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he'd said. Folks, are we able to take advice or even a rebuke, no matter even who has said it? Are we willing to change the way we do things, even if they have a long and honorable pedigree, if something better comes along? I know I have to start seriously delegating things over the next couple of years, things I could quite easily continue to do, but in order to make sure that the church is ready to carry on when I retire. That's why, for example, on your church meeting agendas today, it says something about a missions secretary, someone to take over receiving all the various mission organization information, forwarding it on to the church as a whole, putting appropriate stuff on the notice boards. Not because suddenly I can't or I won't, but because that transition in a couple of years needs to be as smooth as I and we can make it. In fact, we might like still to call ourselves a reformed church. That's a theological term about a particular set of beliefs. But there is a danger in using that word reformed because it's a past tense. There is a danger that we might start to think we are no longer in the process of being reformed by the work of the Spirit of God. If we think we have arrived personally and no longer need to change or to be changed, that's a problem. If we think our church structures have arrived, they've been perfected over the years and have to be resurrected unchanged when the lockdown starts to lift, there's a danger. Even a meek man like Moses found himself trapped in a hole by the way he sought to serve his people. It was probably his desire to serve them that led him into working longer and longer hours, less and less effectively. Folks, nobody needs to feel insulted if it comes to the stage when it's time to change. Worthy things can become weary things and need to be laid to rest in honor. We need to work out what our sacred cows are, then rejoice that we can enjoy a plate of steak. We need, like Jethro, coming to faith in the true and living God, to be humble, to learn, and to live. We need, like Moses, coming to his senses, to be humble, to learn, and live. And if we do this, could we say, God will direct you. You will be able to endure. And all this people also will go to their place in peace. Folks, shall we pray?